please join me in thanking Phil and all of our contributors. What we're going to do now is a very quick question and answer. It's been a very kind of varied session. We've talked about personal values, we looked at societal values. There's lots of interesting questions that comes up. So I'm going to ask Martin to stay here, invite Phil to come back up. And I know we've got Richard Barrett here, who's founder of the Barrett Value Centre that came up with the model that we've seen. So I think we're going to just, all of us be on stage here. Love to hear any and all questions and observations on a personal values perspective, on the societal values. Now, the cunning thing I've done is I've got a microphone on the whole time, but these chaps have only got one to share between them. So let's pass this to Martin to start with. Any questions on anything we've heard this evening in terms of reflections on the national picture, on kind of the process of thinking about your own values? Gentleman here, there's a microphone, so you could wait for that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Really, really interesting. You said it was all about the dialogue, and I'm just trying to make a comparison between the individual and the companies, in that they both have, you have a real people and you have fictional people. And so with the individual, you have the introspection, as we've done, to look at our own values. But then we're also free to choose how we act in our dialogues with other people, and whether we express those values or not. With companies, so you've talked a lot about the internal values of the company, but the difference, it seems, is that their dialogue with other companies, their relationships and how they act is controlled or required by law to be very different. They're very much more structured, that they're required to be competitive, they're required to be in certain ways. And I'm just wondering how you can then change that without actually, or whether you are acting to change that, and how important you see that is.
Who'd like to take this one?
So thank you for your question. We've been mapping the values in organizations now for 15 years, and over close to 4,000 organizations in 60 countries. And why would they want to do that if it was going to create more turmoil? Well, the truth is that once you get these results back, it's the beginning point of discussion amongst employees, and particularly the senior leadership team, about how did we create this? We've got these wonderful personal values over here, and this is what we want, which is really positive, but look at what we've created. And the question is, who created that? And the answer is, we created it. The leaders created it. At that moment, there's something called cognitive dissonance that arises. My God, how did we create this when this is what we want? And that is the beginning of the dialogue. That is the beginning of the change. And when that change begins to happen, because employees have been asked to give the values they see in the organization, you're already inviting feedback. And so what happens with these organizations year by year as they enact changes based on the results of the values, the percentage of employees responding to the survey goes up and up and up. In one of the biggest organizations we worked with, 27,000 people, the first year there were only like 1,500 people who answered the survey. 7 years later, 21,000 people are answering the survey because they've seen that their voices have been heard, the organization changes. And here's the real important thing. As employees become more engaged, because they feel like they're being listened to, their performance goes up, their commitment goes up, and guess what? The organization starts doing a lot better. So it's actually in the interest of the leaders to do this type of thing. But you've got to be a leader who understands that I may have to change because the culture of an organization is a reflection of leadership consciousness. So if I can change who I am, then the organization can change and it can become a more high-performing organization. And that's the story. And that's why more and more organizations, I hesitate to use the word flocking, but it's happening all over the world. The growth in these number of assessments is quite astounding. And because they're creating more value, and employees are happier, and there's more performance, and there's more success.
Thank you, Richard. Let's turn to other questions. Two down here. So lady behind, first of all, and then I can't see who the other person is.
Hi, I'm interested in the validity of the questionnaire because obviously the hierarchical nature of the model is very important. My husband and I had a great debate about the function of listening. So my husband's a spiritual director, and he spends quite a lot of his time listening to God for a sort of how he can sort of serve with love, basically through love. Now, listening comes very low down in your hierarchy. So we were talking about, well, how do you fit listening into such a low level when for, my husband, it was actually quite a sort of compassionate service, meaning and purpose-orientated value.
So a little earlier I said be really careful at looking at these results and thinking they're the truth. They're just a starting point for a conversation. And when someone says to me, well, I don't see listening as level 2, I see it as level 6, or I see it as being of service, I say, wonderful, how do you see it there? Because we're not right about any of this stuff. We're doing all this to be provocative, to say, for most people, this is how it is. But if you see it differently, then wonderful, because now we understand a different perspective on all of this. And in fact, at the very beginning of this work, we went to the validation agencies and we said, we'd like to have this tool validated. And they concluded after 2 days that actually the value of our work was in the customization. And what I mean by that is that when we work with a hospital, we take out customer satisfaction, we put patient care in there. So we customize the list of words to make sure it's really reflective of the group. And they said, if you want to have this validated, you have to use exactly the same set of values across thousands of surveys. And they said, we don't suggest you do that. The value is in the customization and really the power of the dialogue that comes after it. So we can't claim that any of this is true. It's just a starting point for a conversation. But I want to say one thing. When out of 1,000 people, 700 people pick accountability as a desired culture value, we know that something's on their mind.
Thank you, Phil. I think we should want to say something on the hierarchy in the model.
Yes, I just want to address the hierarchical piece. Look, every level is important. And so what we're looking for when we really looking to form a high-performing society, a high-performing organization, are top 10 values at every level. Higher isn't better. Let me say that again. Higher isn't better. You've got to have well-established positive levels at the survival level. Otherwise, man, you're in for trouble. You've got to have really positive relationships. Listening is really important. I know. I'm learning how to do that. Level 3 is really important. I mean, every level is important. But you've got to get those lower levels established in order to build to the higher levels. For example, trust is dependent on all of the other things going on at the lower levels before you can actually have trust. So don't make the mistake of thinking it's hierarchical. It is in one way, but every level is important.
Okay, and there was another question just in front of that one, and then we'll move to the one behind.
Yeah,
Thanks.
hi. My question relates to financial services sector. You had a slide there quoting Anthony Jenkins, talking about the importance of values, change of values in how the financial services are being run. And I think there was some sort of cynical laugh at the back. And I would like to know your assessment of where is the sector in sort of their openness or readiness to actually change their culture. And also just another note, I worked in financial services sector, and I remember when I joined, integrity was emphasized as a very important word. I don't necessarily think that it was lived in the companies I worked at during the years, which was before the crisis. So I'm just hoping that that is changing now.
I'll just have one shot at answering that question and pass it over to my colleagues. But interestingly, one of the sectors of industry where we had the quickest and biggest take-up in doing values assessments was the financial sector. And we felt that was true. That was because that it's very difficult to get competitive advantage in the financial sector unless there is a strong sense of community involvement, there's a strong sense of employees wanting to be engaged and having a great culture. And so whilst we paint the financial sector very black, and we found out can be very black, let me tell you, there are plenty of other great institutions and organizations in the financial sector that are building values-driven organizations. It's not the same everywhere. Of course, what tends to make the news, are the ones that are really being very greedy, trying to lie, and trying to cheat. But outside of that, I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying, there's a whole spectrum of different approaches to the financial sector, and some of them are very, very positive.
I just say one thing there, which is the organisations in that sector can only develop at the level of the consciousness of the leaders, as we've said earlier. So I don't know Anthony Jenkins. I don't know whether he's saying that because he needs to, because of everything that's occurred, or actually because of the consciousness that he is as a leader. I'm hoping it's that one, really, that he's seeing things in a new way and actually has a complete belief system that that's going to make a difference to the organisation.
Can I one quick thing to say about that, which is I was recently in Holland with the equivalent of Mervyn King, the head of the Dutch National Bank, and he asked me to help him host a session with the chief executives of all the banks, the insurance companies, and the pension houses. And I went in there with an open / slightly cynical mind, I have to admit, and I came out with my heart full of hope for what I experienced from these leaders who were really open to a conversation and admitting where they were and where they wanted to get to and the work they were willing to do to get there. It transformed my view. So that was in the Netherlands.
So there's a question in the middle here. We'll take a couple, actually. So take one in the middle here, and then we'll take one at the front as well.
There's all sorts of things I'd like to comment on with this discussion, actually, because just having finished in financial services, looking at building reputation. But I think what I wanted to say about financial services is that actually, trust in financial services is shot to bits. So the only way these organisations can get on the front foot commercially is to address that issue, and building a sort of values-driven culture is one way of doing that. But I think, an observation from my personal experience is that, yes, leaders may experience cognitive dissonance when looking at the results that the employees are seeing compared to what they want. But actually, how they view themselves, the people at the top of these organisations have enormous egos. They wouldn't be at the top if they didn't. And they've got a lot of people around them telling them what they want to hear all the time. And they're not calling out the behaviours that need changing. So the problem is that a lot of the people at the top, they think that those are their values, but it's not what they're displaying. Anyway, I could go on about this at length. But I think it's up to really good consultants to advise, and people inside who are brave enough to speak up, to actually make the change happen and keep the dialogue going. And I think, my other comment on it is that, market factors are such that when you're just trying to survive, it brings out the worst in people. So, my organisation is actually doing a values assessment at the moment, but it's also a bit of a sinking ship. And so the rats are behaving like they do on a sinking ship, which makes it nigh on impossible, I would argue, to establish a values-based culture. But I don't know what your views are on that, having had experience in a number of different organisations. That's my rant over.
Can we hold that thought? So one thing on views on how you deal in that situation. Can we just take another question down here so we can pick up a couple while we go across the panel?
Thank you. The current model of society, it's based on an economic system called capitalism, which the underlying assumptions of this model is competition, individualism, economic growth, power concentrate in the hands of few people. And it seems quite different from those values that we were talking here right now, and it seems quite different from the values that it seems the underlying idea is that we wanted to move to values like love and cooperation and that type of things. Phil talked about that this is the initiation or the starting point of a dialogue. I would like to ask how we could avoid that this dialogue is highly schizophrenic, it seems to me, no? Because it's underlying, it's a contradiction in itself, from my point of view.
Okay, so two questions. So we've got one on how can you build a values-based organisation in a time of chaos when the ship's sinking, and two on what we've just heard there. So Phil, do you want to take the first of those, potentially? Or not? Yeah, how do we deal when the ship is sinking? Can you possibly build a values-based organisation in that kind of turmoil?
Really difficult. When things get to that stage, it's very, very difficult to turn it around because you've lost trust. You've lost the trust of the employees. You've probably lost the trust of your customers. And strangely, synchronistically, I just read an article today on how you turn an organization around that has lost the trust of its employees and its customers. What tends to happen is you need to bring in a new leader. And that's just what happened in Barclays. And because the consciousness of the organization is a reflection of the leader's consciousness. And so when you've got a culture which is not working for the customer, not working for the employees, and not working for society, there's only one answer. The leaders change, or you change the leaders. And that's a tough message. I remember doing an assessment actually in Sweden with a small organization where the level of cultural entropy was 40 to 50%. And the leader understood. And he said at the meeting when we presented back the results, he said, I get it. Look, I've got 2 more years to retirement. I'm the problem. I'm going to leave now. And it's tough to get that message across to some leaders. You know, the Barclays thing was an amazing example of the pressure that came. To change the culture, you had to change the leader. Let's wait and see. The jury's out. I mean, we don't know what the answer is going to be. We've heard the words, we've heard the rhetoric, and, you know, I tweeted, let's see what happens, to whether it's true or not. No, it's really difficult. Really, really hard work to do that, to turn a culture around. But there are people trained in that work who can do it. What was the second question?
The second question was about that kind of strange situation we've got, where we've got a very huge discrepancy between the personal values and this kind of societal picture, this almost schizophrenic thing, and how we explain that. And Phil, you alluded to media influence potentially playing a role there. Obviously, a dissatisfaction with leaders is another thing. I mean, are there other things going on there? So, I mean, for example, one of the questions earlier was, what's this difference between what we say our values are and how we live? Is part of that disconnect because we're saying one thing but actually we're behaving differently, or is it a perception thing, or both?
I'm not quite sure whether I fully understood the question, so I'm going to look at you and hope that I, got something that might make your eyes sparkle. I don't know.
My question is, the assumption of the capitalism are competition, individualism, the opposite of the values that we were talking about.
Yes, okay, got it. So I remember thinking about the answer when you were talking. Then, of course, I got sidetracked because I can only think about one thing at a time. I'm a man. What can you expect? Okay, so there are enough leaders of organizations around now who are beginning to see that this old way of being is not working. It's not working at a political level. It's not working at a societal level. It's not actually working for the corporations. So there's a new movement. And in fact, I just got the book yesterday, Conscious Capitalism. I highly recommend it. And this is a movement that started 2 or 3 years ago in America, and it's coming to UK because we had the person who's going to set up that organization here in the UK with us this afternoon. Conscious Capitalism is a book by John Mackey and Raj Sisodia. And what they discovered in Raj's first book is that it's called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment, okay? You should get this book because it's really fascinating. What they're saying is the most successful companies are the ones that have a purpose beyond profit, which looks at what their contribution to society is. Conscious leadership, conscious management, conscious culture, and a bigger purpose than making money. And it turns out that these are the organizations that have been the most successful financially. Why? Well, I'm sorry, I have to do some advertising because I just finished my new book, The Values-Driven Organization, Unleashing Human Potential for Performance and Profit. Today, I sent it off to the publisher today. And in there, I answered that question. It's because what happens is when people, when you work in an organization where the leaders care about the people, where they care about their basic needs and their growth needs, using Maslow's terms, what happens is the sense of employee engagement goes up, the commitment goes up, and everybody wants to get up and go to that place to work every day. And that extra discretionary energy that comes with that sense of, I love working in my organization because it makes me feel good, and I get a good salary, and I get good holidays, and I fulfill my purpose. That's what really turns people on. That's what conscious capitalism is about. That's what working for one of the 100 best companies to work for is about. That's the secret to being a successful organization. So I'm really optimistic about the future because these companies that really care about the people and care about society are going to be the ones that that do best, most successful, most profitable. And the other business leaders will say, well, what are they doing? Oh my God, look what they're doing. They're caring about people. I think that's the answer also to the National Values Assessment results. Somehow, there is a sense of not caring, and people are feeling it, and so there's apathy. And apathy is like low employee engagement. When you don't feel cared for, man, you go to work and you do as minimum possible, and you play on the computer, and you get onto the websites that you enjoy, and you go home as quickly as you can. And that's low engagement. What we've got in this country is apathy. It's low engagement at the national level.
So a real practical example, when Nestle and Mars, the arch rivals in the confectionery business, they figured out that they could share loads on their trucks going up and down the UK. When the first Nestle lorry showed up in a Mars factory, the employees were shocked. What the hell is going on? And actually the bosses already figured out that it's going to save us money, it's better for the environment. So all those values you listed about what capitalism is about, it's a belief system. It's a belief system that's almost completely contrary to all the laws of nature, and people are realizing that this doesn't work. And now that shift is happening, because actually when you get back in alignment with all those principles and laws of how the universe really operates, guess what? You do better.
Okay, we're running out of time rapidly, and a few people have had to leave already, but can I just, by show of hands, see how many questions are still lurking in the audience? We've got 1, 2, 3, a couple here. So maybe we'll try and squeeze all those in. Given we have an entirely male panel, I won't do any more answering 2 questions at once, given that obviously confused it. Put us through our paces there. So can we be very brief with a few questions? If you do need to leave, do understand, and thank you so much for
We'll try and do
here.
quick answers.
Let's take lady at the back over here to start with. Sorry, Paul, it's completely opposite to where you're standing. Apologies for that. And
if you're going, thank you so much for coming.
We'll wrap up in 5 minutes if you are going to stay for the last few. So let's have quick questions and quick answers. Lady at the back.
It wasn't so much a question. I don't know if I actually say I work for Barclays. So on Friday we had the presentation, and I thought there's some very interesting points you were talking about. And I think something that I don't think was mentioned was really in the financial services for decades. It's been about short-term gain. And that's, I think, kind of, there has to be a monumental shift in looking from short-term gain to long-term gain, in terms of linking into values and actually driving a values-driven culture. I think the lady in the front raised a very relevant point about, I think a lot of that message was driven about being competitive in the market, about the fact that Barclays has lost so much of its reputation and so therefore subsequently so much of its business. In terms of employees, at the beginning of this week, there was an announcement 2,000 people are going to be losing their jobs at Barclays. So there's a disconnect there. You mentioned quite a few times around the employees losing that connection with the company. But in fact, I think a lot of what Barclays is actually driving is actually around losing the connection with their customer, not the employee. It's a complete disconnect. It's not actually about who works for the company.
Fine,
so
thank
it wasn't
you.
so much a question, it was
a very good observation. Let's just take one more, because I'm conscious that people are really trying to leave, and I don't want to sort of keep people here. So, gentleman just at the back here, and this is going to have to be the last one, I'm so sorry.
Hi, sorry. I think what seems to have been ably demonstrated is the disconnect between the small numbers and the personal values and the corporate values. There doesn't seem to have been any reference particularly to just the difference in the mass of those organisations. I think one of the most inspiring things said tonight is that, if we assume if we're going to hang around and wait for governments to do it, we'll be waiting a very long time. We have to do it. To me, that is the logical thing that will happen. If you think back to the banking sector, when they were reputable, they were mutual, they were small, and they operated in a reputable manner. And surely the logical thing that's actually going to happen is not replacement of leadership, it's fragmentation of these organisations. People will just do these things themselves on a small community basis. Small community will come back. A philosopher did once say small is beautiful, and it seems to me that's the model.
Thank you for that. Any final observations and comments from the panel before we wrap up?
I just say on that point, so whatever happens to the large organisations, I don't know, but I certainly agree with you is the more we can in small, it's a big society thing really, the more we can together in small groups take action and start momentum happening around this, I do believe that will make a significant difference.
So I just want to end with a very personal anecdote myself, which is the very first time I was asked to do a values-based assessment. I came up with my list of values, and these are things that are important to me, and I felt quite pleased with myself, and it was contribution to society and caring for others and family and lots of wonderful sounding things. Then this particular exercise asked me to do something which has stuck with me to this day, and it said, now imagine you're a private detective that's monitored your life for the last 6 months. What would they think your values are? And that really shook me up. I was like, well, at the time I was working in a corporate environment, and I had to be honest and said that they probably would think like professional growth, financial reward, power and influence were my top priorities. And and that was a wake-up call for me that I was not living with my values. So I would encourage you and the organisations you work with to think about not only what are my values, but what would an independent observer think my values are. So I'd like to leave you with that nugget, but please join me in thanking everyone who's contributed tonight. It's been a wonderful evening ranging across lots of topics, and I hope you've all taken something away from it. We would love you to see at future Action for Happiness events. Do get involved in the UK Values Alliance, and often after these events, a few of us go for a drink around the corner. So if you'd like to join us for a drink and a chat about all of what you've heard, there's a pub just along on Red Lion Street, which if you come out of the building and take a left, called the Enterprise. So do join us in there if you fancy a drink and a further chat after this. But thank you so much again for being here.